In the last week, Ukraine has had some stunning deep strike attacks against high value Russian targets. It's such a strange change of events that there is speculation that Ukraine may just have access to a new toy in its air power arsenal. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. We're going to be breaking all that down right now. Let's get into it. Okay, so the first thing to note is that yesterday, or I think 2 days ago, Ukrainian bombers reportedly blew up a large Russian warship. This is actually one of the Russian landing vessels, a vessel used to move military equipment en masse across the ocean, in this case, likely around the Black Sea to Crimea, where it's then sent likely to the Zaporizhzhia front. We'll pull it up on the map here. I'll try to show you guys what I'm talking about and why, even though Russia and Ukraine share a land border, it's still pretty important to Russia to have a robust Black Sea fleet. And so you can see here that in order to resupply these troops, for Russia to resupply these troops fighting in the Zaporizhzhia region, they have to bring them into Ukraine. And you guys may have known routinely the Kerch Bridge here that where Russia and Crimea are linked is routinely destroyed by Ukrainian missiles, right? Because it's a static target. As long as the missile can, basically you can plug in GPS coordinates, that missile can hit it. A moving target is much more difficult. For example, a train moving along train tracks or a truck driving along a road. You can't have certain types of long-range missiles operate and hit those targets accurately. The location changes too quickly. So for Russia, being able to rely on vessels, naval vessels, particularly from their Black Sea fleet, to ferry key equipment to the front lines is really, really important. And so it makes sense then that Ukraine would look hard at ships such as, again, the Novocherkassk, in the port of Feodosia in southeastern Crimea. Again, we'll take a look here. Likely, probably right around here. Let's see if we can find. There it is, Feodosia, right here. And you can see the benefit is pretty clear, right? You've got all of these these are warm water ports. Remember, it is late December. It is winter in Russia. A lot of these other ports are frozen. And so this Black Sea remains operable. So Ukraine, though, it's not uncommon for Ukraine to take out Russian air or Russian naval targets. But what's interesting is that usually this is done by two methods that Ukraine has relied on throughout this war. And Ukraine has taken out a large number of Russian naval vessels. The first is their use of ground to sea missiles like the Neptune, right, that sank the Moskva. They also use ATACMS or other long-range missiles. The other tool they'll rely on is drones. They'll actually have long-range drones that Ukraine has actually become pretty proficient in developing, both using NATO tech, but also homegrown drones to act as sort of low-speed guided missiles that can navigate to the target and then launch a strike. The problem, of course, with drones is that they tend to pack a much smaller payload because they need a lot of flight time, right? And the heavier the payload, the less or the more fuel it takes, the heavier the whole drone gets. And suddenly you have this escalating problem where the aircraft becomes so big and unwieldy that they have a hard time getting to their target. And of course, the problem with missiles, as we just discussed, is that they don't really work so great against moving targets. You have to be absolutely certain that your target, you know where your target is exactly, and that it's not going to move. But what makes this interesting is that in the case of the Novocherkassk, it was taken out by an aircraft, right? These are Ukrainian Air Force bombers hitting and apparently destroying the Novocherkassk. Now, if you've been online, even on Instagram, there are a ton of video of this attack, and it is a huge explosion. Obviously, in part probably because the Novocherkassk was loaded with military material that cooked off, but also this appears to be a strike by something much more powerful than a drone. Now, the speculation is actually, this actually comes with one other thing that's worth noting, and that is the unusually large number of Russian combat aircraft that have been shot down or taken out in the last 2 weeks or so. There's rumors that actually the real number is up to 8 if you combine strikes against Russian airfields, right? So grounded aircraft, and also aircraft that were in the skies. And the official reports are that this is the work of Patriot missile batteries, but it seems really unusual that Ukraine would suddenly, over the span of 2 weeks, gain the ability to launch precision deep strike missions into Crimea, right? Very deep into Russian airspace, and be able to take out Russian combat aircraft both in the air and on the ground. And that is something, while the F-16 is it is not the F-22. It is not a 5th generation fighter bomber. It is a highly capable multi-role fighter and is generally a better performer in most categories than the Su-34s and 30s. And as some have pointed out, it also integrates really seamlessly with other NATO weapon systems. And so the speculation then is that Ukraine may actually currently have F-16s in the air. And so the thing that this would, of course, entail is, right, as Newsweek points out, F-16s have more modern avionics, better radars, can launch NATO standard weapons. We've seen some of the cockpit footage from Ukrainian pilots flying these Soviet-era jets, and often they literally have commercial, like Garmin GPS systems taped onto their dash. That's how crude their navigation systems are. So an F-16 with its more modern avionics would be a game changer for Ukrainian forces. Plus, they can mount modern NATO weapons to them. They won't have to rely on old Soviet era missile systems, right? So they can launch precision guided weapons. And it is known that Ukraine has at least received the promised F-16s. Again, my speculation is that they've received them, but they are probably not yet ready to be airworthy. But that wouldn't shock me if you told me that some F-16s were being used on some of these deep strike missions. Now, Now, a Ukrainian commander has a quote here that I thought was pretty brilliant. And this is someone who is Daniel Rice, a former special advisor to Ukraine's Commander-in-Chief, General Valery Zahulny. He said, quote, "I hope the West has learned not to announce new weapon systems, as was done for the most part in the first 20 months of the war. Russian forces should learn the hard way when Ukraine fields a new weapon." This says Rice, who is now president of the American University, Kiev. And this would, of course, make sense, right? Don't give Russia a chance to rehaul their radars, recalibrate their air defenses, reposition them based on, longer flight times, etc. So I think it's highly possible that this is correct, that there really are F-16s in the air. But another explanation is that Ukraine may simply, because it knows the F-16s are coming into their Air Force, they no longer have to be super conservative with their existing airframes, because they know that they can have a somewhat greater attrition rate, because both there are aircraft that can replace losses, and in fact, better aircraft are coming online than the ones the Ukrainians are currently fielding. It may make them much more willing to take higher risk missions. It may also, of course, be that the training cycle of Ukrainian pilots is completing, and that not only is Ukraine getting back new aircraft, but they're also maybe getting back some of their best pilots. So again, with more pilots and more aircraft, Ukraine may be able to sit there and go, hey, let's take some ambitious targets. Right? Let's go after Russian airfields. Let's try to win some air-to-air sorties. Let's try to hit deep into Crimea Russian naval targets. And this is super effective in this era of the war because as winter deepens, the infantry focused combat is going to become harder and harder, right? It's hard for infantry to fight on the battlefield now, and we're seeing it. We're seeing the gains look incredibly small, hundreds of meters a day, barely any meaningful gains, right? When villages are taken, they're tiny villages that are obliterated. And so for Ukraine, they have to ask, how do we throw wrenches into the Russian war machine so that when spring comes and we can return to a robust mechanized combat, that Russia is in a worse state logistically? And that answer is, of course, exactly what they're doing, targeting their logistics systems, their ability to move men and material by air, land, and sea, and by diminishing that as well as hitting Russia's high-tech enablers, right? Russia has no shortage of low-skill infantry, but those low-skill infantry depend, as we know, on their a small number of high-tech enabling systems, things like their thermobaric rocket launchers, their FPV drones, and of course, critically, their close combat aircraft. And by taking out many of these aircraft as well as entire ships, it is really dealing substantial blows to Russian forces. Now, guys, you guys probably know New Year's is here, and I've got a lot of resolutions, especially around diet and working out, and that's why I developed Strike Gum. Strike Gum is a veteran-owned company, namely this veteran, that donates 50% of the profits from this first production run to Ukrainian charities that benefit civilians. But what really makes this great is each individual piece has all the caffeine of an energy drink, all the caffeine of a Red Bull or an Amp Energy, but in a sugar-free package. So if you're looking for a way to get all the energy you need from an energy drink, but you don't want all the sugar, check out Strike Gum and crush your New Year's resolutions. Best of all, of course, we have a New Year's sale going on where orders over $70 domestically will ship for free, and orders over $100 internationally also ship for free. So if you've been thinking about ordering or reordering, now is the time. Check us out, strikegum.com. So while we're seeing on the battlefield, everything is going to start, I think, to slow as the winter gets really deep. I think we're also going to see more and more of these kind of deep Ukrainian strikes. Anyway, that's all I had, guys. Thank you so much. Thanks to all the Colonel and Lieutenant tier members at combatvetnews.com. New video is dropping later today, so check us out, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.